Curtis Malone knelt in the mud, his weathered hands trembling as they examined Dakota's leg. Twisted and broken, the once proud Mustang lay helpless, eyes wide with pain. Around him, voices whispered, "No vet can fix that. He'll have to be put down." But Curtis wasn't ready to give up. Not this time. It had been 2 decades since he'd last practiced veterinary medicine. 2 decades since the accident that stole his brother's life and shattered Curtis's will to heal. Now rain poured down, and beside him stood Meredith Fuller, clinging to her daughter Ruby, both drenched in tears and fear. Curtis looked up. "I can help him," he said. That single sentence would change everything. Just 4 days later, a line of black SUVs crawled up the muddy road toward Curtis's quiet farm. The first one stopped. Out stepped Preston Wellington, Red Rock's wealthiest rancher, and the very man who once swore Curtis would never touch another horse again. What happened next would leave the entire town speechless. No one imagined that saving Dakota's leg would spark a chain of events that would transform not only Curtis's life, but the future of animals across the entire state. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And if this story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we've got something even more incredible coming your way. That morning had started like any other on Curtis's modest farm outside Red Rock. As dawn lit the hills, he followed his daily routine. Coffee in a chipped mug, border collies racing through overgrown grass, and the quiet stillness of a life long forgotten by the rest of town. Curtis, once called a miracle worker with animals, now fixed fences and tuned old engines. He hadn't answered a vet call in years. Most people had stopped calling. Most, but not all. That's when he heard it. Tires grinding up his muddy driveway. A battered pickup with a horse trailer came to a stop. A woman jumped out, frantic. A young girl trailing behind, face streaked with tears. "Are you Curtis Malone?" the woman called, her voice cracking. "I am," he replied, cautious. "I'm Meredith. This is my daughter Ruby. We need your help. A horse. He's hurt bad." A pained whinny from the trailer said the rest. Curtis's chest tightened. The instincts he'd buried for 20 years surged back. "Please," Ruby said, her voice trembling but fierce. "They want to put Dakota down, but Mama says you can help." Curtis hesitated. "I don't practice anymore." "We know," Meredith said. "Everyone does. But Mrs. Miller at the feed store, she told us what you did for her son's calf. She said you still have that magic." "We can't afford surgery," Meredith added. "But we can't just let him go." Her voice broke. Curtis stood frozen, haunted by memories of the clinic he once ran, the lives he saved, and the one he couldn't. His brother's face flickered in his mind. "I'm sorry," he muttered, starting to turn away. "We came from Dr. Chapman's," Meredith said. "He said it's a complex break, expensive, impossible for us." That's when Ruby stepped forward and gently touched his arm. "Dakota's different, Mr. Malone. He was wild when we found him. Nobody believed he'd ever trust a human, but he trusted me. Please, just look at him." Something in her eyes, hope, courage, something real, stopped him cold. "I'll take a look," Curtis finally said. "That's all I'm promising." They nodded, tears of relief already in their eyes. Curtis stepped into the trailer. There lay Dakota, a stunning Mustang, drenched in sweat, his leg grotesquely bent. Curtis knelt beside him, speaking in a low, calming voice. Miraculously, the horse began to settle. Curtis's hands moved instinctively along the leg. The fracture was bad. Surgery, pins, and months of recovery. That much was true. Dr. Chapman hadn't lied. It would be a miracle to save him. Thunder rolled overhead. Curtis glanced at the sky. He hadn't even noticed the storm brewing. "How did it happen?" he asked. "A flash flood hit our land yesterday," Meredith said quietly. "By the time we found him, he was trapped in a gully," Meredith said, voice tight. "He must have panicked, tried to climb out over the rocks. That's when his leg gave out." Curtis nodded grimly. The swelling, the angle, it all matched a hard fall on rough terrain. Still, as his hands moved along the injury, he felt something surprising. Strong vitals. Dakota was fighting. "Mr. Malone," Ruby's voice cracked. Can you help him?" Curtis looked up and met her eyes. He should have said no. He should have told them to go back to Dr. Chapman, or maybe to call a specialist in the next county. This wasn't his life anymore. But before he could speak, the Mustang nudged his hand, gentle, deliberate, almost like he was asking too. And suddenly, Curtis wasn't standing in a muddy trailer. He was back in his first clinic, young and certain, where healing animals meant everything. The rain was picking up. Meredith urged Ruby back to the truck to stay dry, but Curtis stayed by the horse's side, gently stroking his neck. "Come on, boy," he whispered. "You want to fight, don't you?" Dakota's ears flicked toward the sound, his dark eyes locking with Curtis's. That was all it took. Curtis stepped out into the storm, rain soaking through his flannel shirt, and walked to Meredith's window. "I'll need help getting him into the barn," he said. Meredith blinked in disbelief. "You'll try to save him?" "I'm not promising anything," Curtis replied, though part of him already knew it was more than that. "But yes, I'll try." The next 2 hours blurred by. With Meredith's help, he sedated Dakota and guided him into the barn, a space untouched by real work in years. But the stall was still clean, the lights worked, and tucked away in a dusty cabinet was the old medical chest Curtis had never quite thrown out. Ruby watched, wide-eyed, as Curtis pulled out tools he hadn't used in 2 decades. His hands moved like no time had passed, like muscle memory had never faded. "Can I help?" Meredith asked. Curtis nodded toward the far wall. "There's a red toolbox in the cabinet, and I'll need hot water, whatever you can heat." As they worked, the storm intensified, pounding the roof with steady thunder. Curtis narrated his steps, part out of habit, part to steady himself. "It's a compound fracture, but not as bad as I feared. I can set it. He'll need a custom brace, and the hardest part will be keeping weight off it." Ruby's voice was quiet, full of hope. "But he can heal?" Curtis paused. "It's possible. Not guaranteed, but possible." "That's more than Dr. Chapman gave us," Meredith said softly. Curtis kept his focus on the leg. "Russell's a good vet," he said, "but he plays it by the book. Some cases, they need a different kind of book." "Is that what got you in trouble before?" Meredith asked, then quickly added, "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair." Curtis's hands stilled for a beat. "No," he said. "What got me in trouble was thinking I could control everything. That skill alone was enough." His voice dropped. "I was wrong." The barn fell into silence, save for the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. Curtis worked methodically, resetting and splinting the leg with what supplies he had. Finally, after an hour, the horse was stable, sedated, but breathing easy. "I'll need to get proper medical supplies," Curtis said, wiping his hands. "You two should get home before the storm gets worse." "We can't leave him," Ruby protested. "Ruby," Meredith said gently, "Mr. Malone knows what he's doing." Curtis looked at the girl's face, anxious, determined. Something shifted inside him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Responsibility. "You can come back tomorrow," he said softly. "He'll be sleeping most of the time anyway." "Promise you'll call if anything changes?" Ruby asked. "I promise." Meredith reached into her purse. "How much do we owe you for today?" Curtis shook his head. "Let's see if this works before we talk about payment." "But the supplies, your time—" "I've got what I need for now," he said, though deep down he knew he didn't. He'd have to pull from his dwindling savings just to get what Dakota needed. As the truck pulled away down the muddy road, Curtis stayed behind. He dragged an old cot into the barn and set it beside Dakota's stall. He told himself it was to keep an eye on the horse, but in truth, it was something more. Something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Purpose. As the wind howled outside and the lantern cast a warm glow across the old barn walls, Curtis sat in silence, listening to the horse's breathing. He looked up at the rafters and whispered, "What would you think of this, Joe?" His brother's name hung in the air, soft and heavy, and for the first time in 2 decades, Curtis Malone didn't feel alone. The only response was the steady patter of rain on the roof and the occasional soft whinny from the sedated Mustang. But as Curtis finally drifted off on the stiff cot in the corner of the barn, a quiet realization settled in. For the first time in decades, he felt like he might be exactly where he belonged. Putting this story together took a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's get back to the story. Morning broke gently, with pale sunlight seeping through the cracks in the barn's weathered boards. Curtis woke with a start, momentarily unsure of where he was, until yesterday's memories came rushing back. His back ached from the cot, but he pushed through the discomfort and turned to check on Dakota. The Mustang was awake, alert, despite the sedation. Curtis approached quietly, his voice calm and familiar. "Morning, big guy. Let's see how we're doing." The vitals were steady. The swelling hadn't worsened. The makeshift splint had held. These were good signs. But Curtis knew they were only temporary victories. What Dakota really needed were real medical tools, proper medication, and supplies he hadn't stocked in years. Then he heard tires crunching on gravel. Meredith's truck rolled into view, and before it had even stopped, Ruby jumped out and ran toward the barn. "How is he?" she called out. Curtis smiled faintly. "Better than I expected," he said. "He's a fighter." Meredith followed at a steadier pace, carrying a thermos and a paper bag. "We brought breakfast," she said, "and coffee. Figured you might need it." He accepted it with a grateful nod. "Thanks." Inside, Ruby had already made her way to Dakota's stall, speaking to him in soft tones. The horse responded with a gentle nicker. Curtis watched the interaction, noting how the Mustang visibly relaxed. "He knows you," Curtis said. "That's good. Familiar faces help them heal." Meredith's gaze moved around the barn, taking in the hasty setup. "What happens now?" Curtis took a slow sip of the hot coffee before answering. "Now comes the hard part. I need proper supplies. Bracing, antibiotics, pain management meds. Without them, infection's a real risk." He hesitated. "I'll have to go into town." Meredith caught the hesitation. "When's the last time you went into Red Rock?" Curtis sighed. "Been a few years." In truth, he avoided town whenever possible. Main Street came with memories he'd rather keep buried, along with the stares and whispers. "I could go for you," Meredith offered. "Just give me a list." Curtis shook his head. "Some of it requires a veterinary license. I have to go myself." "Then we'll stay here and watch over Dakota," Ruby chimed in, already sitting cross-legged near the horse, careful not to disturb his injured leg. Meredith nodded. "Take your time. We've got him." Curtis felt a wave of gratitude, unexpected and unfamiliar. It had been so long since someone offered to help without expecting anything in return. He scribbled a few notes and handed Meredith a list of instructions. "If anything changes, anything, you call me immediately. Here's my number. I'll keep my phone on today." After a quick shower and change of clothes, Curtis climbed into his old pickup. The drive into town wasn't far, just 15 minutes, but emotionally, it felt like crossing a canyon. Each mile brought him closer to a world he'd left behind on purpose. Main Street looked frozen in time. The hardware store, Miller's Feed, the small diner where whispers traveled faster than the coffee pot. As he parked in front of the veterinary clinic, he could already feel eyes on him. A few older locals paused to look, their glances sharp, familiar, and full of quiet judgment. Curtis ignored them and walked through the clinic doors. The bell jingled, a sound that stirred something deep inside. At the front desk, a young receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" "I need to speak with Dr. Chapman." "Is he in? Do you have an appointment?" "No," Curtis said simply, "but it's important. Tell him Curtis Malone is here." Her eyes widened just slightly at the name. After a short phone call, she pointed toward the hallway. "Second door on the right. He'll see you." The clinic smelled just as he remembered, sterile and familiar, a mix of antiseptic and the scent of animals. Curtis walked past rooms he used to work in. Memories flooded in with every step. Dr. Russell Chapman sat behind a clean desk, his white coat pristine. He didn't stand. "Curtis," he said, guarded. "Been a long time." "Russell," Curtis replied, remaining on his feet. "I need supplies." Chapman raised an eyebrow. "Supplies? I thought you weren't practicing anymore." I'm not, Curtis said flatly. It's for the Fuller horse, and I need your help. Recognition flickered across Dr. Chapman's face. Dakota. So that's where they took him, he muttered, leaning back in his chair. I told them to put him down. That leg, it's beyond saving. Maybe, Curtis replied quietly. But I'm going to try. Chapman studied him for a long beat. After all these years, why now? Why this horse? Curtis didn't have a perfect answer, not even for himself. Because the girl asked me to. Chapman's hardened expression softened just a little. Ruby's something special. Reminds me of you. Back then? He trailed off with a sigh. All right, what do you need? A wave of relief washed over Curtis as he pulled the list from his pocket. Chapman looked it over, his curiosity now fully engaged. You're really going to attempt a full reconstruction without surgery? Curtis nodded. The Anderson method, modified for this break pattern. Chapman raised his eyebrows. That's experimental at best. I've seen it done, but only a handful of times, never on an injury this bad. I've done it once before, Curtis replied. On one of Preston Wellington's thoroughbreds, similar injury. Chapman looked up. Before the accident with Joe? Curtis winced, but nodded. Yes, before. After a brief pause, Chapman stood and walked to a supply cabinet. I can get you most of this, he said. But the custom bracing? That has to come from the equine hospital in Hillsborough. It'll take at least a day. I don't have that long, Curtis said firmly. Infection risk skyrockets after 48 hours. You know that. Chapman hesitated, then picked up the phone. I'll call in a favor, no guarantees, but I might be able to get it here by tonight. As he dialed, he glanced back. This doesn't mean I agree with you, Curtis, but that horse deserves a chance, even if it's a slim one. While Chapman worked the phones, Curtis stepped into the waiting room. The whispers had already started. The receptionist was quietly talking to a client, both stealing glances in his direction. Then a familiar voice cut through the tension. Well, I'll be damned. Curtis Malone back in civilization. Sheriff Gregory Sanders stood in the doorway, his badge catching the fluorescent light. Just picking up supplies, Curtis said, keeping it simple. Greg stepped closer, his voice dropping. Heard about the Fuller horse. Word travels fast in Red Rock. You sure about this? It's been a long time. Some things you don't forget, Curtis answered. Like riding a bike. Greg raised an eyebrow. This ain't changing the oil in a tractor. You're trying to save a leg another vet said was hopeless. Curtis's tone sharpened. Russell's a good vet, but cautious. Always has been. And you? Greg said. You were the one who took the risks. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes. He didn't finish the sentence, but both men knew where it was going. Joe. Before Curtis could respond, Chapman returned with a box and a prescription pad. Bracing materials will be delivered to your farm by 6. The rest is here, he said, handing over the items. Your license is still valid technically, never revoked. Then he paused. Curtis, be careful. Don't make promises you can't keep. Not to that family. Curtis nodded, grateful and grim. And one more thing, Chapman added. If you need help, backup, second opinion, call. Pride's not worth a horse's life. The drive back to the farm was heavy with thoughts. The Anderson method wasn't just unconventional, it was delicate. The tension had to be perfect, the inflammation closely monitored. It was high risk, but it was Dakota's best chance. As Curtis pulled into the driveway, what he saw brought a rare smile. Ruby was sitting on a stool beside Dakota, reading aloud from a book. The Mustang's ears were perked, like he was actually following the story. Curtis stepped into the barn. How's our patient? He ate a little, Meredith said from across the stall, mucking out old bedding. And he's calmer than this morning. Curtis checked the vitals. Strong. No sign of fever. The meds will help with the pain and keep infection away, but the real work starts tonight, once the brace arrives. Can we help? Ruby asked, eyes wide with anticipation. Curtis hesitated. The procedure would be long, intense, maybe upsetting if things went wrong. But he also knew having extra hands and Ruby's calming presence could make a difference. "It'll be late," he warned, "and it might not work." "We don't mind," Meredith said firmly. "Whatever happens, we want to be here." Curtis nodded. "All right, but I need to know more about Dakota. Age, health history, how long you've had him." Ruby lit up. "He's about 6. We got him 3 years ago during a BLM roundup. Nobody wanted him. He was too wild. They were going to send him to auction." She trailed off, and Curtis didn't need her to finish the sentence. Auction meant slaughter, more often than not. "But he trusted me," Ruby said. "He was different with me." Curtis glanced at the Mustang, now watching them with calm, intelligent eyes. Different indeed. Dakota may have been wild, but he wasn't wild with me. Ruby's words lingered in Curtis's mind as he observed the way the injured Mustang responded to her voice. Even through the pain, the bond between them was undeniable, one of those rare connections that can't be explained, only felt. Curtis had seen it before, once or twice in his life, an unshakable trust between animal and human. As the afternoon wore on, long-forgotten instincts returned. The rhythm of preparation, the feel of instruments in his hands, the steady pace of organizing meds was oddly familiar. But under that surface, confidence was something else. Unease. It had been 2 decades since he'd performed anything this complex. 2 decades since everything had fallen apart. While Meredith stepped outside to make a phone call, Ruby approached quietly. "Mr. Malone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The kids at school. They say you stopped being a vet because you made a mistake. That someone died." Curtis froze. The surgical scissors in his hand suddenly felt much heavier. "Children shouldn't repeat everything they hear," he said gently. "But is it true?" she asked again. "Is that why you live out here all alone?" He set the scissors down. This girl deserved honesty, but how much? After a pause, he replied, "Sometimes things go wrong, even when you do everything right. And sometimes it's hard to forgive yourself for that." Ruby thought for a moment. "If Dakota doesn't get better, will you stop helping animals again?" The question hit him harder than expected. "I don't know," Curtis admitted, "but I promise. I'll do everything I can for him." Ruby nodded. "I believe you." And just like that, with those 3 simple words, Curtis felt something shift inside him. Trust. Real, unfiltered trust. Something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. As evening approached, the rumble of a delivery truck broke the silence. The specialized bracing materials had arrived. Inside a large box bearing the Hillsborough Equine Hospital logo. Curtis opened it carefully, handling each piece like it was made of glass. Despite the years, his hands moved with precision. The Anderson method required an intricate external fixation system, a frame of rods and pins that would stabilize the brake without disturbing the muscle. It was like scaffolding for a healing limb. "All that goes in his leg?" Ruby asked, eyes wide. "Not inside," Curtis replied, checking a series of metal pins. "It surrounds the leg, holds it in place from the outside like a cage for healing." Meredith watched, her voice calm but concerned. "How long will it take?" "If everything goes smoothly, a few hours," Curtis said, "but recovery will take months, and even then, no guarantees." "But there's a chance," Ruby insisted. Curtis gave a small nod. "There's a chance." "We'll take it," Meredith said. Curtis glanced toward Dakota. "He'll need to be sedated again. I'll need help keeping him calm before it kicks in." "That's my job," Ruby said confidently, moving to Dakota's side. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, Curtis turned the barn into a surgical suite. Bright work lights glowed over the stall. Instruments lay organized on a freshly cleaned table. The old barn, quiet for so many years, was alive with purpose again. Ruby knelt beside Dakota's head, gently stroking his mane and whispering to him as Curtis prepared the sedative. The horse didn't flinch. His trust in the girl was unwavering. "That's it, buddy," she whispered. "Mr. Malone's gonna fix you, I promise." Curtis administered the injection, watching as the Mustang's breathing slowed. "He'll be unconscious soon," he said. "Might be best if you both wait inside the house." "I'm staying," Ruby said firmly. Meredith placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Ruby, this may be hard to see. He gets scared when I leave, she replied. He needs me here. Curtis understood the devotion, but also knew what was coming. How about a compromise? Stay until he's fully under, then wait just outside the barn. I'll call if I need you or when he starts waking up. Ruby looked like she wanted to argue, but Meredith gave her that motherly look. That sounds fair, doesn't it? After a moment, Ruby nodded reluctantly. But you promised to call if anything happens. Scout's honor, Curtis said with a smile, surprised by how easily the warmth came back into his voice. Once Dakota was fully sedated, Curtis got to work. He began by thoroughly cleaning the injury, exposing the full extent of the damage, 3 separate fractures in the cannon bone. For most horses, it would have been a death sentence. But Curtis had seen worse, and he'd used the Anderson method successfully before, back when he was still working with high-performance thoroughbreds. Time slowed. Curtis fell into that old familiar trance, the deep focus that comes with a difficult procedure. The barn faded into silence, the only sounds the steady rhythm of his movements and the occasional murmur of wind outside. Every pin, every rod had to be placed with pinpoint accuracy. Too much tension and the bone wouldn't heal. Too little and it wouldn't stay aligned. Blood flow had to remain unrestricted, nerve endings preserved. It was a delicate dance between engineering and medicine. Outside the barn, Ruby and Meredith waited under the porch light, watching the shadows stretch through the cracked barn door. And inside, Curtis Malone was fighting for more than just a horse's life. He was fighting for redemption. Curtis Malone thought he had left his veterinary days behind, along with the pain of losing his brother Joe. But when a young girl named Ruby showed up at his farm with a badly injured Mustang named Dakota, everything changed. Despite his doubts, Curtis agreed to help. And as he began the complex treatment, something inside him started to heal too. The arrival of Dr. Chapman, his former mentor, turned the procedure into a quiet reunion. Chapman offered his help, and together they completed the groundbreaking Anderson method to repair Dakota's leg. As the days passed, Curtis found unexpected strength in Ruby's presence. Her simple faith in him reminded him of who he used to be, and when she asked if he'd stop helping animals again if Dakota didn't make it, he realized he wasn't just doing this for the horse, he was doing it for himself too. The surgery was a success, but Curtis knew recovery would be slow and uncertain. Still, when Dakota began to stand, even walk again, it was nothing short of a miracle. But just as things began looking up, an old rival returned. Preston Wellington. 2 decades ago, Wellington blamed Curtis for the death of his prize stallion, and Joe. Now he was threatening legal action to shut down Curtis's work. But Ruby, wise beyond her years, faced Wellington head-on. And unexpectedly, so did Wellington's daughter Angela, now a respected veterinarian herself. Angela reviewed Curtis's work and offered him something he never expected: a consulting role at Wellington Stables, and a chance to lead again. More than that, she offered Ruby a future too, a mentorship and full veterinary scholarship. In helping Dakota, Curtis had done more than fix a horse's leg. He'd rediscovered his purpose. He reopened his heart, rebuilt trust, and finally forgave himself for a loss that haunted him for years. The barn that had once been silent was now full of life. Curtis was no longer the reclusive farmer. He was once again doctor, Malone, healer, mentor, and partner. As Ruby, Dakota, and Meredith, her mother, became part of his daily life, Curtis realized something profound. Sometimes, healing a broken animal means healing yourself too. And maybe, just maybe, a horse named Dakota didn't just get saved, he saved them all.